Saturday a week ago, I took my wife to Atlanta. We were in LaGrange with our family. Took some time away last weekend, but early last Saturday morning, a week ago, I took my wife to Atlanta with a one-way ticket to Lexington. And the reason for that is her mother had been in the hospital a week, is still in the hospital at this time. Hopefully will be moving to another facility for extensive rehab plus extensive antibiotic treatments and stuff for bacterial infection. So it's just been a long struggle the last 2 weeks. She's in the hospital, but the week before that it was a struggle at home. So her mother's Phyllis, and so if you want to pray for Phyllis, we'd appreciate it. And even though my wife did get a one-way ticket, we do expect her to come home at some point. So we're just waiting for everything to sort of settle out up there. We're open-ended. Had no idea how long but she needs to be up there. And actually, Phyllis watches our early service before she goes to her service in Kentucky. So she's been part of our church for many years. As long as we offered online stuff, she's been a part of our church and recognizes a lot of people and knows a lot of names. And obviously, this is a very, very tough time for them. And we're praying that all will continue to trend better in the coming days, and hopefully my wife will be able to come back and join us. But yeah, she did want to reiterate she is planning on coming back, right? Even though it was a one-way ticket. All right. So thank y'all praying for Phyllis. The word today is new. The word today is new, and we like new. Particularly, we like new as it relates to where we live. Did you know that the average American will move in their lifetime 11 or 12 times? I thought that was a little high, personally, but then I started doing my own math in my head, and I came up with, actually, if I count my moves as individual plus my moves as married person, family dude, I'm up to 9. I'm up to 9. I'm only 58 years old. In the first 18 years of my life, I didn't move. So I'm up to 9, just by myself. Fortunately, the handful of moves that my wife and I have made with our kids, we were able to move in such a way that we moved at a time when our kids were young enough to when they actually didn't start school, they came here, as far as real school. And then we had a couple of moves already here in this area, but it didn't change where they went to school. So both of my kids really were never the new kid. That when I started thinking about it, they really never were the new kid type thing. Now, Bobby, our other pastor, a little bit different for her kids. They're up to 5 times being the new kids, and they're hoping that they don't have to be a new kid for a while. And I started thinking about my own life. I never really was a new kid, even though I went to a private Christian school called Wesleyan Christian Academy. Even back then, I was a Wesleyan. Went there as kindergarten, first and second. Moved to public school in 3rd grade. Never was really the new kid, because all of us that had been at that private Christian school that really wasn't doing a good enough job, apparently in my parents' opinion, that they all came to the public school with me. So I was with friends the whole time. So it never really felt like the new kid. But what was new for me was college and grad school, truthfully, too. That's new, because think about it, 7:30 to 3:30 for in school years, kindergarten or 1st grade through 12th grade. 7:30 to 3:30 every day is planned for you. I mean, you got something to do, 7:30 to 3:30. And parents are going, yes, thank you, God, that we have that, right? But 7:30 to 3:30, and I got 5 days of history, 5 days of math, 5 days of English, 5 days of science. And then I make this move to a college, and I don't go to school every day. I take 2 or 3 classes, 2 or 3 days a week or something like that. I'm not in school, but 2 to 4 hours. It's new. It's different. And there are challenges involved in that, because the challenges are in the free time, right? The challenges are in time management there. And it's new. Not necessarily bad, but, now I don't have 5 days of one thing. I got 2 or 3 days of history, 2 or 3 days of biology, 2 or 3 days of German. I already forgot it, so I couldn't say 2 and 3 in German, so I kind of, I already forgot. English comp, 2 or 3. It was new, and there were challenges involved in that. It was good though. It was good, but there's challenges, and sometimes when we transition to that new, sometimes it doesn't work out real well. Sometimes we can't adapt. And our word to the wise today from Ephesians is the word new. Is the word new. And it's going to be good. Well, what Paul tells us about being new is good. But there's challenges that come with it. And the challenges are not so much of wanting to fully embrace the new, but the challenges are more of not wanting to let go of the old, of being comfortable with the old. All right? Here's what Paul said about being new. 4:23 in Ephesians. Let your minds and hearts be made new. Let your minds and hearts be made new. The next verse he says, you must become a new person and be God-like. Then you'll be made right with God and have a true, holy life. So you have a new mind, you have a new heart, you are a new person, a new person that loves Jesus and honors God with your life. A person that looks like Jesus and honors God with your life. But why should we become new? Why should we become new? What's the big deal about being new? Primarily because the old wasn't working very well. And Paul tells them this. He said, so I'll tell you this, verse 17 of chapter 4, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. Don't live as the Gentiles in the futility of their thinking. Y'all ever heard the phrase stinking thinking? Yeah. You actually find it in Cambridge Dictionary. They take off the G and put the apostrophe there, stinking thinking. But this phrase, stinking thinking, actually came from an American psychologist named Albert Ellis. And he basically said what this is the propensity for us to engage in thoughts that do not serve us. That we engage in thoughts that do not serve us. We all know that our thoughts precede our action. Mostly, right? Most of us actually think before doing something. I know some of you have kids that go, they don't. They don't at all, right? But on some level, we have to think a little bit before we act on something. And for our thoughts to serve us, get this, for our thoughts to serve us, it means that our thoughts help us to engage in activities and in life that helps us, that maybe pushes us to something greater than ourselves. It encourages us to be better people, right? And so the stinking thinking is thoughts that don't serve us. These thoughts don't serve us. And that's what Paul was saying about the Gentiles had futility in their thinking. That their thoughts were not serving them. And in fact, their thinking was futile, which is another word for saying empty, which is another way of saying aimless or lack of purpose. That's what Paul is telling them. And here's the difference. Paul, if you remember, is a Jewish person. He called himself the Jew of all Jews. He was the best Pharisee there ever was, right? So he was knowing. He knew about how the Jewish people lived and how the Gentiles people lived. What was the major difference? God. For all the wrong that we have looked at in how the Jewish people lived their lives and were acting in their religiosity when Jesus was walking in this earth, for all the bad that we have about the Orthodox Jewish traditions during this time, the one thing they had right was God was at the center. That their purpose, albeit some ways that we would not have appreciated, their purpose was to live for God. And so the Gentiles did not have that. The Jews did. The Gentiles did not. And Paul was saying they are aimless in their life. They were aimless in their life. They were living empty lives. The Gentiles, the futility of their thinking, they were living empty lives, literally stinking thinking. He says this then. He goes on to say in verse 18, they are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. He's talking about the Gentiles. Here's another way of saying it in NLV version. Their minds are in darkness. They are strangers to the life of God. This is because they have closed their minds to Him and turned their hearts away from Him. In other words, Paul is saying they chose darkness. They were choosing darkness. The people, he said, the Gentiles, the futility of their thinking, they chose darkness. That's why. That's why they're living empty lives, because they chose darkness. God was not an option for them. Now, this was despite evidence to the contrary. Because remember, Paul is writing this story or writing this letter to the people of Ephesus, but also to other Christian communities where other pockets of Christians were. When Paul, as known as Saul, started killing Christians, those who followed Jesus soon after Jesus was resurrected, they all left Jerusalem and went to different communities. And this letter, we believe, is circulated to these different communities where pockets of believers, of Christians, people who followed Jesus, were living. So if they had left Jerusalem, they had already had an encounter with Jesus. They knew the difference Jesus had made in their lives, and they were living it out in these communities. So they were telling their story. And I believe, even though we don't have a lot of documentation about it, in these separate communities, I believe that people's lives were being healed and people's lives were being changed. And so as he's writing this letter, he's saying that even despite all this evidence of people's lives being changed, of you sharing your story and living for Jesus, they're still choosing darkness. They're choosing to leave God out of the picture. And some of you really will not like hearing this, but you could actually be here today. You could be watching online and choosing darkness. You could be here and choosing darkness. Now, why do I say that? Why do I say that? Because you've closed your minds to God. And I know what you're saying. I already hear you saying, wait a second. Hey, I took the effort to get up and get out of bed and get on my couch to watch today, right? Or I got out, I came early to get on the balcony so nobody else would get my seat. I came here, I'm sitting in the pew. What do you mean I have a closed mind, right? I'm obviously open because I'm here. Wouldn't I be open just by being here? Well, depends. Why'd you come? Are you here today because your kids said, hey, let's go? I want to go to church. I want to eat a cookie. I want to be with Mr. Jamie. You know, I want to see Nick and Lauren. You know, did your kids get you here today? Maybe your spouse kicked you in the rear end and said, we're going today. Come on, let's go. I'm not fixing coffee. You can get it at the church, right? Are you here because somebody made you feel guilty? Are you here because it's going to look good? That you can be seen? That you could check in on Facebook? I was at church today. Is that the motivation for being here? Because here's the thing. It's probably the biggest thing. Did you come with an open mind or a closed mind? Did you come with an open mind or a closed mind? In other words, what was that mindset when you walked through those doors? What was your mindset? What was your mindset when you turned your computer on and pulled up covenantdothan.org or went to the YouTube site or our Facebook page? You know, what was your mindset? You know, I think most of us who are sports fans know this fact, that our favorite team can't be up and play their best game every week. We know that. And some of us know it's been a long time since our team got up. But, you know, have they ever? Not this year. Anyway, so not this year. But we know that. And so I'm very cognizant of the fact that there's potential every week for the music to not tickle your fancy, right? The music may be, oh, I'm not sure, I don't like that one. I didn't like that one. I know that's a possibility. You walk in and you'll hear a song and go, that didn't do it for me. So I know that we'll walk in and understand that, okay, preacher's too long-winded today. He's rambling about something. I'm just not with it today. So I realize that the message and the music may not be a home run every time, but here's what I do know. God shows up every time. God shows up every time. So what's the mindset? What's your mindset when you know that God's going to show up every time? Now, as part of that darkness, Paul goes on to describe what keeps people in darkness. Verse 19, having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. Though they're not sensitive, but they're sensual. They're not sensitive, but they're sensual. And I sort of had a flashback. If Hayes McKay was here and he heard me use the word sensual, he'd be going, oh my gosh, what's Kyle going to say? That's what's Kyle going to say. Lord, please shut his mouth. Shut his mouth, Lord, right now. Don't let him say something stupid. Don't let him say something that I'm going to get an email about. All right, so I'm not. I'm channeling my Hayes McKay voice, right? And sensual basically means anything and everything goes, right? There are actually some translations that the word shameless will appear right here. Shameless, right? That means the people that Paul is talking about that are in darkness, they're doing things that they do not have any shame about at all. Their actions, their words bring no shame. They don't care. They are shameless. That's a bad place to be, folks. That's a dangerous place to be if you're in a place where you do nothing that causes you to feel shame. I can say something to a person that hurts their feelings. I'm going to feel shame. I'm going to say something flippantly. And I hear about it later and go, oh, I ticked off somebody now. I feel shame. Just things that I do privately that I know God's going like, Kyle, you idiot, what are you doing? Bring shame to me. But Paul is saying the people that are in the darkness, they have no shame at all because it's all about me, me, me. It's all about me. Can you imagine what it would be like to be married to someone that all they think about is what's in it for me? How long do you think that marriage will last? If it's all about me, 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 what I want, what I need, when I want it, and all now. And I don't care anything else that goes on around me as long as I get what I want. Can you imagine what a marriage would look like? Can you imagine what just simply relationships look like when people are out there with this type of attitude and mindset that are engaging in relationships and having kids in these relationships? What's going to be the outcome? What's going to be born of the consequences of those decisions when it's all about me, 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 me? And you have ex-people in your relationship, and you have kids in those relationships. What's going to happen? We see what happens. We see it in many communities and many cities that are imploding because of the consequences of a me world. Paul really adds the word greed to this too, and it makes sense, because greed is not simply about money. Greed is simply wanting more. Greed is simply wanting more. More power. More pleasure. But Paul says this, verse 20, however, however, is not the way of life you learn. That darkness, that shameless life, that is not the life you've learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in Him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. I know you don't want to go back to school, some of you, but we got to go to school. Because this is the language, right? You learn because you heard and you were taught. You learn because you heard and taught. You're putting yourself in a position to learn. You're listening to people talk about Jesus. You're listening to people teaching you about Jesus. And what happens when you're able to put yourself in that position and you're learning, you move away from the stinking thinking. You move out of the darkness. You start living a life where you start to feel shame, and then you move from being a greedy person to a giving person. Paul goes on in verse 22, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds. Here's an attitude adjustment. This is a simple attitude adjustment. You see, sometimes we have to make the decision in our mind before our heart follows through. We have to make a cognitive decision. We have to make a logical decision. We see the evidence, and many of us will follow on this line. We see the evidence. We hear the testimonies. We hear the stories. We read, and we make the conclusion in our minds that this way, the way of Jesus, is the best way. The best way for my family, the best way for my future, the best way for eternity, the best way to live out my current life now. And then our heart follows. And then there are some of us who on the emotional end of it will be stirred, will be moved by a song, by a challenge, or whatever it is. And our hearts come first. And it takes a while for our minds to catch up. Paul says, put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So we got to put off and put on. This is very intentional. This is very deliberate. Paul says, you make that choice. It's in your hands. You put off and you put on. But I think so many of us are putting off. We're putting it off. And we don't. We don't need to do that. You see, if you put off something, you got to put on something. Unless you're in some beaches in Europe or California, you got to put on something, right? You got to put off something. You got to put on something. What will you put on? Many of you have heard different times throughout your lifetime that this religion stuff is personal. That's a personal thing, and don't. That's your life. Don't force it on me. And I agree with that statement. Actually, I don't force it on anybody. But here's the deal: following Jesus is personal, but it's not private. Following Jesus is personal, but it is not private. You know, when you have something new, don't you want to use it? You buy a new car, you don't go put it in a garage and not ride it anymore, right? Unless you're Jay Leno, right? Or there's a story on AL.com. Look it up. Earl Trammell died last year, 88 years old. Has $1 million worth of cars that just got sold that basically were brand new, that were bought in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think one Corvette from the 70s had like 10 miles on it. Basically brand new cars, bought them, never drove them. Most of us don't fall in that category. Right? My wife buys me a new shirt. I'm not going to frame it and put it up in my house and say, thank you, honey, for this wonderful shirt. It looks great. No, I'm going to wear it. I'm going to wear it. When Jesus was walking this earth, and he encountered people. Over and over, he encountered people. He had a personal relationship and met a number of different people. And in most places we have recorded in the Bible, when he met someone, they were almost like a new person. And what happened when Jesus encountered people? They couldn't shut up. They couldn't shut up. They were telling everybody, look what this man did. Look what this man said. I was blind, but now I see. I couldn't hear, but now I can. I could not walk, now I can. And it's all because of Jesus. They would not shut up. Jesus told one guy, hey, don't tell anybody about me. The guy said, okay, and crossed his fingers and went and told everybody. Paul, when he met Jesus on the Damascus Road, he heard the voice of Jesus, was blinded for 3 days. And ever since, after those 3 days were over, he could see again. He could not shut up about Jesus. He was a new man. He was made new. And shipwreck couldn't keep his mouth shut. Prison couldn't keep his mouth shut. Torturing couldn't keep his mouth shut. You couldn't shut him up because he experienced something new. Now, there's a handful of people. There's a lot more people in this group that I believe that are on social media. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. And every now and then, I'll just jump on Facebook, and every now and then I see a reel that I'll watch because the reels are pretty short, right? And what I've seen is pretty cool. Is when people post on Reels or TikTok and Instagram about how they are a new person. And they show who they were and now who they are, right, present day. Most of those, if you watched them, know that I have just lost 300 or 400 pounds. And they literally are a new person. You would not recognize them from the first frame to the last frame. They are literally a new person. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. That was hard work. They made a lot of hard decisions to get to that point, to be that new person. They were excited to share. So what about you? What about you? What are you going to, and are you going to put